well. And right now joining us on the Comcast Business Hotline Beyond Fast is Andy Benoit. Andy, good morning, man. How you doing?
Doing well. How are you guys?
Doing excellent.
Great.
I see. Yeah, you do a lot of stuff here, man. A lot of NFL breakdowns, and now you're getting in the sports betting scene. What do you have going there?
Talking about odds because we found that you can analyze odds the same way you can analyze football now, and everybody smiles upon it. It's a good time to be a sports fan.
It certainly is, and it's wild, especially going through the shutdown that we just went through in the sports world and a lot of everybody else, furloughs and being laid off. And it's because a lot of that sports betting money, it just wasn't there at that time. And now it's back. It's rushing back. They're doubling down on that right now, to use a betting term in its own right. So what are you going to be doing with all this?
I'm going to be doing the same thing your listeners are doing, which is just watching everything possible about the NFL and taking in some respect. An opening Thursday night game, and it's unusual circumstances. There's a part of me, and I don't know, I can't tell if it's a morbid part of me or a passionate part of me that's just innately and intensely curious what it's going to look like having these games on TV with no fans right now.
Yeah. Now, the NFL commissioner came out 2 weeks ago now and said that fans did not have an impact on the game. I just thought that was an odd thing for the commissioner to really put his name on, especially after he had built up so much good faith during shutdown and during this past NFL offseason.
Well, I think, first of all, I think the NFL has done a tremendous job of handling all this, and they caught some breaks. Their schedule just fell in a little more favorably than some of the other sports. With the draft, they kind of got to sit back and see for a few weeks how things were working out for baseball and basketball, and they made a decision. And the initial reaction to a lot of the moves they've made has been, oh, you can't do that. The pandemic's going on. You need to delay these things. And they've said, no, we're going to march ahead. We're going to keep going. And it's worked out really well so far. Now, they're at their biggest challenge yet, of course, with these actual games going. My guess is what Roger Goodell was thinking when he says something like that is not so much. I think he's trying to maintain the value of the television aspect of this thing. He's not saying, fans in the stands don't matter, but if you have all the teams complaining about the artificial crowd noise, that artificial crowd noise is there because they believe that it will make the viewing experience that much better, and that's really what's important. You get millions and millions viewing the game on TV, you get a few tens of thousands in the stands. They're just trying to protect their business, I think. So if the crowd noise thing truly doesn't work or they need to adjust it, I'm sure they'll do that. But my guess is all Goodell's trying to do is the same thing he was trying to do before the draft, which is just stiff-arm any coaches or teams that are complaining publicly about the imperfect condition.
Mm-hmm. Speaking with Andy Benoit, now, just a general question, as you have that national perspective of the Eagles, we obviously have the local perspective, but when you look at the Philadelphia Eagles team, Carson Wentz, some young new receivers for him, what do you see in this team?
Well, I think those new receivers, that's a huge deal because, for one, people have forgotten that Carson Wentz is a superstar quarterback. He plays at that level pretty consistently. He's going to have a few more ups and downs than other guys because he's an innately aggressive player. But he carried that team at times last year. He was the MVP front runner in the year that the Eagles won the Super Bowl for much of the season. He was the front runner. And now he's got weapons around him. And I think, obviously, anyone who watched that team last year could see the lack of speed and it really derived from a lack of wide receiver talent. That was the biggest hindrance to the offense and probably to the entire team. When you give speed to a guy like Carson Wentz, I think two things happen. For one, he is willing to take those shots over the top. He'll just use the most literal form of the speed. Think of those deep bombs he had to Deshaun Jackson in Week 1 against Washington last year. And one of those plays that Jackson really wasn't even part of the progression. Wentz just chucked it loose to him, and they got over the top. So, there's the obvious part of it. But more than that, the Eagles do what you call a lot of flood concepts, where they put three receivers. After the snap, they all go to one side of the field. And there's one guy very deep. Usually it's going to be Deshaun Jackson. There's a guy in the middle, and there's a guy underneath. And I haven't charted it exactly, but my guess is probably 80 to 85% of flood designs result in a pass going to the guy in the middle. And when you have a guy over the top who's fast, that opens up those middle throws a whole lot more because at this point it's all about high-lowing the linebacker and then kind of high-lowing or two-on-oneing the safety, if you will. So you need speed in order to do that. So the speed is going to help not just the guy that Wentz is throwing the ball to. He's throwing the ball to faster players this year, but it will also open everything else up for everyone else, and not just open it up, but do it within the context of how the offense is designed. So I think it's going to look like a totally different offense. Wentz's circumstances this season are significantly more favorable, at least in that department. The O-line's probably some questions now with Brooks out, but there's a lot of reason for optimism because I thought the Eagles did the right thing with who they picked up this offseason.
Andy, let's go further on that. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. They got Darius Slay to be that shutdown corner that they haven't had here in a long, long time. Many say Darius Slay didn't have a Darius Slay type year last year. What do you see from him? Was it just a year last year that he didn't perform up to his standards, or is there maybe some slippage on his part?
Well, I don't think very many corners would have performed well under those standards in Detroit. Detroit had, I think their sack numbers wound up being very good, but they had one of the 3 or 4 worst pass rushes in football last season. So a lot of their sacks were coverage-related sacks, and there's no corner in the NFL that's going to hold up in any kind of coverage. In Slay's case last year, it was usually man-to-man. You're not going to hold up for 4 or 5 seconds. That's not humanly possible. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think Slay's still a very high-level player. If he's not a top echelon corner, he's probably near the top of the second echelon. Let's say there are 5 or 6 echelons. I don't know. But he's a very good starting NFL cornerback. I'll be curious to see if they travel him with number ones or not. He's done that at times in his career. He's even done that in the slot from time to time. I'd be a little surprised if it goes that way here just because Jim Schwartz does a little bit more zone coverage, does a lot more zone coverage and man-to-man. And it's you can travel a zone corner outside. It's a lot harder to travel him into the slot. So we'll see where Slay winds up or lines up this season, but there's no question they got an upgrade there, and obviously it's a position they felt was important because they really invested a lot in Slay.
Now, is it a trend throughout the league that you've noticed? Because as far as valuing or not valuing linebackers go, because the Eagles here, really ever since the days of Jeremiah Trotter, and even in the middle of the days of Jeremiah Trotter, have not really valued the linebacker position. Is that a trend throughout the league?
It really depends on what kind of scheme you run. I think for more teams, it probably does lean that way. And they wouldn't say, well, we don't value linebackers, but what they say is we value pass rushers and one-on-one pass defenders. And then probably the next guy in the order of that for a lot of teams would be we value the safety position. And, Philadelphia, I would probably put in that class. They would value the pass rush first, probably at this point cover corner second, safety third. Maybe it's the other way around, and safety is second, cover corner third. But, it's just not – they don't emphasize the linebacker position. You can't emphasize everything. You have finite resources. So I think that's the way that's gone. But, there are plenty of linebackers that still get paid. Blake Martinez for the Packers last year, now the Giants, is a good example. He came from a Packers team that really doesn't value linebackers as much as other teams, and now he's on the Giants. And Blake Martinez is a pretty typical starting linebacker. He's a good player. I don't think there's anything special about him. And I think he's making $10 million a year, if I recall. So it's not like the linebacker's not becoming the fullback position, but the nature of the game has changed. And the flexibility of safeties is part of that as well. Safeties do linebacker jobs now.
Andy, where do you see the Eagles in the NFC East? Most of us here, and I think around the country, agree that it's a two-team race between them and the Cowboys. But where do you see them falling with the Cowboys? And then overall in the NFC, where do you think the Eagles might be?
Well, they're probably neck and neck with Dallas. I think you probably feel a little bit better about the completeness of Dallas's offense, given that their offensive line's healthy and Philly's is kind of an adjustment in progress, we'll say right now. But these are two really, really good teams. And, getting Javon Hargrave into the fold now up front, and I don't know what Malik Jackson will be this year coming back from injury, but let's say he's a solid contributor. That's a huge upgrade in multiple ways for this team. And if Josh Sweat takes a step forward, which I think he's capable of doing, now you're talking about a fairly deep pass rush. Again, not what you had in 2017, but certainly a top 10 pass rush. And we've seen how valuable that can be for this defense and all that it means. So I probably would say Dallas is a little bit more complete on paper. But where Philly's strengths reside, it's really intriguing to be so much better at wide receiver than they were and then to have what looks to be a yet another formidable defensive line, those have trickle-down effects. Those are going to make both sides of the ball a lot better.
Speaking with Andy Benoit of SI.com, Andy, when you look at just the coach specifically and Doug Peterson, a lot of responsibility is falling on his plate, especially with not having an offensive coordinator. They choose not to name an offensive coordinator because he calls the plays. What do you see from a national perspective when it comes to how good a coach Doug Peterson is?
Well, I think Peterson's a phenomenal coach. I mean, he's got a Super Bowl ring early in his head coaching career. He's come up under the right guys. He's hired some really good people that have had success in the NFL. And, you know, the whole coordinator thing, you know, I think they feel Press Taylor is a really rising young star of a coach, and he'll handle the details of some of the passing game. And then Jeff Stoutland will handle some of our run game. And, you know, they've had one of the most, when they're healthy, they've had one of the most diverse rushing attacks in all of football. And so Peterson's a guy that puts it together and oversees it. He was really in a tough position last year because of what we talked about with those wide receivers. And so it's a little difficult to analyze a play caller when you're having to hide weaknesses, because now we don't know what the motivation behind certain plays are. Doug Peterson knows what he wants to do. It's a matter of whether he can do it. And I had a coach tell me once it was very simple, but it's one of those things you probably need to hear to really think about and have it click in. He said, good coaching, it's not what you can call, it's what you can call that your players can do. And I think Peterson overall has managed that fairly well.
And I think so, too. I think that's one of the best things that he does as a head coach is manage his personalities and manage his talent. And then the other thing that I wanted to focus on with you, again, from more of the national perspective, is when you look at a guy like Miles Sanders and you look at his impact in the run game here, we look at him. I mean, you talk about guys on the upswing, like a guy like Press Taylor as a coach, maybe. We look at Miles Sanders as a guy that has a lot of talent, but also still a lot to prove, needs to stay healthy to do it. How do you look at a talent like Miles Sanders?
With a lot of intrigue, because I think those guys, the coaching staff feels that he can be, if he's not literally this kind of player, or he's not exactly the style, he's a variation of it. He can be an Alvin Kamara type of weapon in their passing game, smoothness to his athleticism. It's almost effortless. It's not quite effortless, but he naturally covers a lot of area without having to adjust his running style in the process. He's just a good moving, gliding runner. But the other part that stands out is he can beat you on vertical routes out of the backfield. And that's actually one thing Kamara does not do a whole lot for the Saints. Kamara is really a pretty dynamic underneath receiver for the most part. Sanders, and I don't, maybe it's because of that gliding style, whatever it is. There were times last year, I remember the Lions game, he got him a couple times running vertical routes out of the backfield, and that's something I think the Eagles will do more of this season, and that's extremely difficult to deal with because, for one, linebackers have to turn and run with you, and linebackers already have their handful in man coverage. To turn and run then is a bigger challenge. But for two, most zone coverages are set up in a way that it does not account for a running back going vertically, because it's uncommon. If a running back lines up 7 yards deep, he's 7 yards behind getting into his route. So most teams don't send them deep. Sanders, the Eagles have been willing to do that, and that gets back to some of the aggressiveness of the passing game and having a quarterback that's willing to work late into the down and stay tough in the pocket. So I think we're going to see some big things from Sanders this season.
All right, and last thing for you, and I love hearing everything, and gliding smoothness to his game. I that's gonna bang around my head for a little while. I love that. Andy, I talked to Andy Benoit and SI.com. The other thing here, Andy, is this whole Jason Peters fiasco. How did you follow that story? Because we had him at right guard here in Philadelphia, and we're all looking at it going, well, wait, your left tackle just got hurt. Why not just move that guy? It turned out to be a little bit of a song and dance. What did you make of it?
Well, what I make of it is Jason Peters is a veteran who's been around a long time and understands the NFL from the tactical side and from the business side. And I think here's another way to look at it. Of all the teams that have lost their left tackle to a season-ending injury, how many of them have been able to replace that guy with a veteran future Hall of Famer who knows every part of your system right away? It was a little messy getting to it, but nobody cares about that. You've got a left tackle that at least can hold down the fort, and that is 1,000 times better than what pretty much every other team that's ever lost a left tackle can say.
Andy, I really enjoyed this conversation, man. A lot of great stuff. Now, where can we follow your betting analysis, sir?
You can just go at Andy _Benoit.
At Andy_Benoit. We will certainly do that. Andy, thank you so much for joining us, man. Great stuff.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks,
it.
Andy.
And that was, I was already amped for the football season.
Yeah, right?
I was already amped for tonight. Now I'm even more amped for Sunday.
Farzetta with Bob Cooney and Jamie Lynch. Mornings on 97.5 The Fanatic. Philadelphia.